We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with filmmaker, actor, journalist Yuval David. Now, Yuval, you mentioned at the end of the last segment about how we talked about progressivism, and you identified yourself as a small p progressive, which I think is an interesting distinction. But I want to delve into what's happening across American society in terms of how anti-Semitism has almost become it's an acceptable ill in college campuses, and we've seen this for the last year and a half or so, where people are allowed to protest. Well, since October 7th, really, and they're allowed to protest against Israel, and they're allowed to keep Israeli students or Jewish American students out of campus and make them fear for being at their place of education. And this gets essentially brushed under the carpet or classed as an expression of free speech by people who would not accept the reverse situation.
Well, it's important to also speak about this clearly. I'm a free speech activist.
Of course.
I believe in the importance of free speech. Yet free speech must also come with limitations. What is happening is there's more free speech, and I'm saying that in air quotes, that's allowed when it's targeting Jews, when it's masked with terms of anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, and yet targeting Jewish synagogues, targeting Jewish student groups, targeting Jews who try to walk on campus.
How dare they?
How dare they
How dare they
be openly Jewish? So the free speech, when it's very violent and calling for violence and intimidation, is allowed when it's about Jews. But if it was about LGBT people, if it was about Black people, if it was about Muslim people, if it was about indigenous people, if it was about immigrants, it wouldn't be allowed. So why is there this double standard? What we're seeing are campus caliphates. We're seeing these Western campuses that were once hallowed grounds of critical thought that have become these breeding grounds for regressive, not progressive, but regressive ideologies cloaked in the garb of progress. So that's why I call them fauxgressive. They're fakely progressive. The Council for American Islamic Relations, CARE, Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, the misleading named JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, which, by the way, is neither. It's neither a Jewish organization, nor is it for peace. Other organizations like Not in Our Name, and all of these pro-Palestinian student groups that have actively spread jihadist propaganda across these campuses that we're seeing in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, across Europe. And what we need to focus on is they do this with funding and ideological support from groups that are linked to terrorist organizations. So academic freedom now includes these horrendous calls to globalize the intifada. Professors defend chants of intifada and resistance by any means necessary as protected free speech. Well, what about the Jewish students who are being harassed, physically threatened, silenced in classrooms? It's insane, and they're labeling themselves as anti-Zionist. They're reframing what Zionism is about. So it's important to say Zionism is the movement about the self and community actualization of the Jewish people, making sure that Jews are connected to their history and their indigenous homeland. If you read Jewish texts, the Bible, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Gemara, if you look at Jewish prayer books, if you read about every Jewish holiday, we always have a connection to a specific land. The Jewish people have been occupied, have been colonized for thousands of years, and we have always prayed about our homeland, understanding that our peoplehood is directly connected to a specific region. So Zionism is a successful decolonization movement. Zionism is a successful indigenous rights movement that was a movement that started during the Roman era when Jews said, someday we will be able to govern ourselves. Well, you know what? We now govern ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's quite fascinating that the use of Zionist has really become it's so pervasive. And you and I talked briefly about different LGBT movements that almost embrace an anti-Zionist agenda within their frameworks. Could you expand on that a little bit for me?
We see LGBT, or as many refer to themselves, LGBTQIA plus organizations creating safe spaces, which is a wonderful concept of a safe space, and creating spaces including events and conferences and gathering community events to empower and nourish the nationalist movements of the MENA region, of the Middle East and North Africa. Now, what they also have done is said that these are Zionist free zones, which means they're supporting and nourishing and creating a safe space for nationalist movements of people across the Middle East and North Africa other than for Jews.
Mm,
Zionism is a nationalist movement for Jews. There is nothing wrong with nationalism. We should be able to connect to our nations. What does a nation mean? A group of people who are connected with a common characteristic. It's not only being a citizen of the UK or citizen of the United States or citizen of Israel or citizen of Germany. It can also be about being Catholic,
mm.
being uh, Orthodox Jewish, being Muslim, being a person who loves to ski, right? A nation is a group of people that wants to connect and help themselves. Sorry, I mentioned the skiing. I'm
How
an
do I
avid
get a
skier.
passport to this skiing nation?
Oh, talk to me because it's my favorite sport. So you're in. You're already in.
Okay.
I mean, I already like you. You're in.
I can get a visa. I can get
You
a
get a
visa.
visa. Yeah, it's great.
All right. It's
Um,
just the tariffs
you,
that I'm worried about.
that's true. So we've seen these LGBTQ
Mm,
organizations creating spaces for Arab, African, Muslim, LGBT people, but not for Jews.
mm,
That is racism. Anti Zionism is racism. Anti Zionism is hateful bigotry. It's against the Jewish people. So, in meetings that I had with the FBI and ADL and all of these major organizations in the United States, part of what I do within my social and political advocacy is making sure that language is used correctly. When the FBI came out with statistics saying that the Jews are are the most targeted religious group in the United States, I raised my hand and said, well, wait a second. I've been physically assaulted. I've been targeted because I'm Jewish. I don't walk around with a kippah, a head covering. I don't walk around with side locks, of
mm.
long hair by my ears. I don't have a beard. I shave. So when I'm targeted, am I being targeted because I'm Jewish as a religion? Or am I being targeted because I'm Jewish as my ethnicity, as my nationality? And they were aware of this and they were getting a lot more information coming in. And the FBI continued to do even more studies and looking at all the data that they had gathered. And it turns out that the Jewish people in the United States are also the most targeted ethnic group in hate crimes, in ethnic
Mm.
based hate crimes. We're 2% of the US population, and we're 70% of the victims of religious and ethnic based hate crimes. That's a pretty terrible statistic.
It's a mind-blowing statistic. Yuval David, we've just about run out of time on this. Could you let our listeners and viewers know where they can follow your work?
Well, I would love for your listeners and viewers to follow my work because I definitely get targeted by hate groups. So help me shift the algorithm to just spread fact-based information instead of
Have you met the
factual information.
internet?
Yeah, I know. But you know what? We are the algorithm. For
Right.
all of your listeners, they should engage with your show. They should share your show. They should comment on your posts and, do the same with me. So it's easy to find me. There aren't that many Yuval Davids, Yuvaldavid on all social media. Although on Instagram, it's Yuval underscore David underscore. I couldn't get the Yuval David. So follow me on every platform and I'd be glad to engage with you on social media.
Yuval, thanks ever so much for being here.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. And I'd like to take a moment to thank our special guests for the day, Mr. Tim Donner, the longtime host of this here show, and Yuval David, activist, author, and filmmaker. Thank you both for being here. You are appreciated. And of course, I'd like to extend my gratitude to you, the listeners out there in Radioland, who take the time each week to tune in and join the show. Final thought for this week. Winston Churchill once said, quote, "All the greatest things are simple and many can be expressed in a single word. Freedom, justice, honor, duty, mercy, hope." End quote. A range of beautiful concepts expressed in single words. And he's right, because the plainest truths do not need to be explained or expanded upon. They just are. When people obfuscate language to usurp the meaning, they know that they're treading on the edge of a dishonest abyss. So let's speak plain. Let's all speak truth. And who knows what kind of world we can create from that. Thanks for listening. And please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation. And this presentation is no endorsement. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.